Snow hammered the wooden outpost before sunrise, turning the windows into rattling panes while a tired heater hummed. Inside, SEAL Team 7 Bravo platoon crowded a scarred table where maps wore red grease pencil grids. Lieutenant Cole Harrison, 03, traced routes as Senior Chief Mason Brewer. E8. Listen to an ANPRC 152 for a clean window. Petty Officer Daniel Cruz eased the antenna and rode the static, trying to hold a thread of signal. Their weapons rested close by. M4, a 1, carbine stacked neat. 1 MK-48, Mod 1, ready to carry the mobile punch. And an SR-25 MK-11 set for designated marksman work. In the corner sat Lieutenant Ava Whitaker of the U.S. Army Guardian Overwatch. Arctic multicam muted against the wood. Her M2010 ESR in 300 Win Mag lay beside her with a suppressor as she logged wind and temperature in a dope notebook. She ran a press check, confirmed brass and the bolt in battery, and never touched the forward assist. A few SEALs traded a look that said babysitter and paper targets, then went back to work because the storm had no patience for pride. The radio clawed through with a report of a recon element pinned near Grid Sierra 5 as the wind rose. Ava studied the map and terrain lines and said the valley ran east to west, a wind funnel that would box any advance. Harrison gave a nod, and she chose the East Ridge Overwatch and stepped into the blizzard at 5:30 a.m. Snow closed the world into a white wall as the platoon moved in single file toward the grid. Lieutenant Cole Harrison walked point, lifting a compass and a wrist-mounted GPS at measured intervals, then sliding both back beneath his glove. Senior Chief Mason Brewer paced the line and checked distance and bearings against the map. Petty Officer Daniel Cruz wrestled static on the ANPRC 152 and tried to catch a clean burst from the net. Weapons sat at low, ready, and spacing stayed honest in the wind. Breathing slowed on short halts that let frost clear from masks and gave a fast visual count from front to rear. Boots sank to the shins and rose again in a steady cadence that kept heat in and panic out. The storm shaved every edge until the valley felt like a tunnel with no walls. On the East Ridge, Lieutenant Ava Whitaker built an observation position that lived close to the snow. She scraped a shallow pit, stretched a compact camouflage net, locked a bipod for the M2010 ESR, and clipped a thermal device to her day optic until the image settled clean. She logged wind, temperature, and humidity in dope notes and sketched a quick range card for both slopes, marking crew-served weapons and anyone directing fire as top priority. She listened to the platoon net in short windows when the storm eased and let her rhythm fall into one breath. One scan. One correction. The platoon slipped deeper into the funnel as visibility sagged under 50 yards. Harrison kept the bearing true, and Brewer held the intervals while Cruz guarded the tiny voice in his headset. On the ridge, Ava settled her cheek weld and let the crosshairs breathe. You do not have to see everything. Only enough. From the East Ridge, Ava Whitaker studied the valley and saw snow that did not lie right. Shallow depressions ran against the wind, and drift lines broke where they should have smoothed. Thermal shimmer winked through her clip-on optic and marked firing points on both slopes. She keyed the net with a warning that the grid was dirty. The answer came as a PKM ripped the snow into spray. SEAL Team 7 Bravo platoon dropped to cover and answered with short, controlled fire from M4A 1 carbines, while the SR-25 MK-11 hunted for a crew-served gun. The MK-48 Mod 1 chewed a lane and kept heads down. Petty Officer Daniel Cruz took a through the thigh and was dragged behind a snow ridge as Senior Chief Mason Brewer snapped the fight into order. Lieutenant Cole Harrison kept his voice clear even as the ANPRC 152 drowned in static. Ava ran her dope fast, held for wind, and took the PKM gunner first. The assistant gunner leaned into the feed tray and folded when next round hit. She shifted to a firing point and clipped a spotter trying to call angles. The storm grew louder and the radios fell apart. New bursts opened from fresh cuts in the slopes, and their arcs overlapped like closing doors. Fire superiority slipped away, and the platoon hugged the ice as rounds cored the snow around them. Ava steadied her breath and knew the perch would not save them. Overlapping arcs chewed the valley until the math turned against them. Ava Whitaker accepted it in a breath and locked the decision in place. She slung the M2010 ESR secure across her back, brought the M4A1 to her shoulder on semi, and ran a clean press check that showed brass and a bolt fully in battery without touching the forward assist. A short transmission said she was moving. Then the net dissolved into static. She dropped from the perch and bled into dead ground where the slope hid her from the guns. The cadence was simple and strict. Stop, then scan, then move. Each step low through knee-deep snow, while wind and whiteout blurred her outline and swallowed her trail. A sentry appeared half-turned toward the wrong ridge, and she put one controlled round into center mass. Then slid behind a drift. She indexed a fresh magazine, seated it clean, stowed the partial, and resumed the line she had drawn in her head. Distances became a quiet count that never left her breathing. She angled to the rear of the firing line, reading micro-terrain and marking priorities in order. Any crew served team first, then anyone directing fire with clipped gestures. Behind her, Cole Harrison held command and control with short brevity calls as gaps allowed, while Mason Brewer managed security and ammo checks at each brief halt, keeping ranks and rolls tight. Ava reached the edge of their perimeter, heartbeat steady, sight picture clean, and set her intent on creating pressure from behind that would open a corridor for the platoon. Wind covered her shape as Ava Whitaker slid along dead ground at the back of the line. The suppressor on the M4A1 turned each round into a flat crack that vanished in the storm. A sentry stood half-turned toward the wrong slope and folded to a single center mass shot. She eased forward, eyes low, muzzle steady, breathing even. A two-man crew tried to muscle a PKM onto a new lane. Ava set the cadence in her head and sent 3 paced shots that took the gunner, then the feeder, before they could reorient. She shifted positions after the engagement to throw off return fire and let the wind erase her prints. Move, then scan, then move, kept its rhythm as she marked anyone directing fire or touching a machine gun for priority. Magazines felt lighter, and the fight stayed loud. So she performed a quick tack reload, indexed a fresh magazine, seated it clean, and retained the partial without breaking her sight picture. On the valley floor, Lieutenant Cole Harrison reassigned sectors to keep a clean lane and prevent fratricide, as Senior Chief Mason Brewer kept security tight and ran ammo checks, while Petty Officer Daniel Cruz received steady TCCC behind Fiverway cover. Radios broke and healed in short bursts that hardly beat the static. Yet every man felt the fight tilt without seeing why. Tracers began to arc the wrong way as firing points faltered, and the enemy formation started to unravel. Ava held on the far slope with a clean sight picture and a calm trigger press. The platoon settled behind cover, reading the pattern they could now trust. The storm pressed down and hid the pieces that mattered. The next move waited on timing rather than luck. Snow static thinned for a heartbeat, and Cole Harrison caught the window. He recognized the pattern from the rear and knew Ava Whitaker was working the far slope. He issued short brevity commands, aligned sectors, and confirmed positive identification across the line. The plan was simple and tight. Fire on his mark with clean lanes and no friendly in the box. The platoon settled behind hard cover and set their sights. The SR-25 Mark 11 reached for the last crew, served threats, and waited for the cue. The MK-48 Mod 1 built a wall of steady suppression that pinned likely exits without flooding the lane. Harrison breathed once and gave the mark. From the far slope, Ava stayed on semi and kept the 3-beat cadence that had become her metronome. A short string cut the last PKM, and a quick lateral shift denied counterfire. She checked her lane, held it open for the platoon, and moved again before the wind could lift her outline from the snow. The formation across the valley began to fold in on itself as leaders went quiet. The valley erupted like a door kicked from both hinges, then settled almost as fast. Overlapping arcs failed, and the scattered return fire died under a minute. ceasefire rolled down the line, followed by 360 security, quick ammo checks, and fast hands-on gear to catch small failures. Radios stayed fragile, so hand signals and eye contact carried the reset. The field fell, still under the weather. Threats were neutralized by disciplined fire from two directions and good control. Harrison looked to his men and shifted the focus to casualty care and consolidation. On the far slope, Ava held her lane a breath longer, then let the rifle drop to safe and watched the wind take the last smoke from the snow. Wind slid back into the valley as the firing faded, and the platoon built a tight ring of security. Daniel Cruz lay behind firm cover with a through-and-through to the thigh and heavy bleeding that soaked his pant leg. Teammates pulled him farther into the lee of a drift and set rifles to safe with muzzles low. Gloves worked fast but careful, eyes never leaving their sectors. Ava Whitaker knelt in the snow and stripped back the fabric with practiced hands. She applied a combat application tourniquet high and tight on the limb, turned the windlass until the distal pulse was gone, and marked the time on her glove. She packed gauze deep into the wound channels and built a clean pressure dressing that held under movement. Her voice stayed even as she grounded his breathing and focus. She ran a quick March reassessment, checked airway, watched the rise of his chest, and felt for circulation that matched color and temperature. She fought the cold next, sliding in insulation in a dry layer, then adding a small heat source to guard against shock. Weapons remained safe and pointed away as hands moved around the patient and kit stayed under control. Mason Brewer managed security and passed gear forward without clutter. Cole Harrison kept command with short bursts that slipped through the static and gathered an ace report across the squad. Ammunition and equipment losses were confirmed and logged in the simplest words. Movement stayed economical and calm while the wind hissed along the ridge, bleeding under control and vitals steady. The patient was packaged for movement, and the team aligned to shift toward better shelter when the next window opened. Snow tightened until the ridgeline blurred, and the platoon fell in behind Ava Whitaker in single file for a kilometer to shelter. Weapons were slung to conserve energy and heat. Straps snug, optics capped against blowing ice. Spacing stayed honest in the gusts, and short halts kept breathing controlled and eyes counted from lead to rear. Cole Harrison held command at the front with quiet hand signals and simple checks, while Mason Brewer guarded the back trail, scanned for movement, and checked on Daniel Cruz, who was packaged for movement. They reached a narrow cut in the rock with an entrance half buried in ice. Ava swept a light across the mouth, cleared the near corners, then called the space clear and waved them in. The air stilled inside as boots scraped stone, and an MSR stove came to life with a soft rush. Steam lifting from wet sleeves, muzzle discipline and safeties stayed solid while layers were managed to fight hypothermia and cold injuries. Gloves dried above the stove, socks changed, and the casualty insulated with a dry, warming layer and a windbreak. Brewer noticed an engraving near the trigger on Ava's rifle, Guardian 03, and he understood. Ava said she hates losing Americans, and the cave settled into a calm respect. She checked the sky and the slope lines for a workable window and marked bearing and drift in her head, while Harrison updated the plan and walked the team through what would come next. First light thinned the storm, and the radio finally cleared. An inbound MH-60M from the 160th SOAR checked in at 7:20 a.m. as Cole Harrison traced the grid on his map and matched it to his wrist GPS. Mason Brewer prepared a stretcher and ran an oxygen line for Daniel Cruz while the team tightened gear. Ava Whitaker stood offset with the M2010 ESR slung and watched the high ground. Harrison set 360 security and validated the surface where the skids would touch. Weapons went to safe and muzzles stayed low to avoid foreign object damage in the whiteout glare. A VS-17 panel came out when the air brightened enough to see color. When the snow field turned blinding, they shifted to an IR strobe and a Chemlight Y pattern and kept smoke in reserve unless the wind played fair. The crew chief called 1 minute out, and the rotor wash kicked a local whiteout that tried to erase everything. Hand signals carried what the radios could not, and the ground team held their positions. Brewer and a teammate lifted Cruz, moved in step, and passed him to the ramp without breaking rhythm. The crew chief locked the patient to stanchions, checked airway and straps, and verified intercom for lift. Ava kept her lane clean and her eyes on the ridges while the platoon marshaled the bird with IR and gloves. Harrison scanned for last threats and walked the perimeter with quick nods. The helicopter settled into a cautious hover that held the plan together. Pickup was set to turn outbound as the net flickered and steadied just long enough to hold. The MH-60M lifted from the snowfield, and the rotor wash whipped the white into a rising spiral. Cole Harrison paused at the ramp with one hand on a strap and looked out across the glare. He gestured for Ava Whitaker to board, while the crew chief cinched straps on Daniel Cruz and called clear for lift. Ava stood outside the arc, with her rifle slung, and answered with a small nod that said she would walk out on her own. Senior Chief Mason Brewer raised a tired salute that carried more weight than words. One by one, the rest of the platoon echoed the gesture at the threshold, while weapons stayed on safe and muzzles pointed low. Harnesses were tight, and loose straps were tucked so nothing could spin into the rotors. The crew chief kept his eyes on the skids and the gauges and gave Harrison a final nod. The radio stayed clipped and quiet as the aircraft climbed and the downwash began to settle. Ava turned north into the open and let the noise fade behind her until it was only a hum on the wind. Her figure pulled thin against the glare and then shrank to a single line of steps that cut the snow in a straight run. The valley felt wider for a moment, and the cold seemed softer. Harrison stood at the ramp and watched the last of the spiral settle. He understood that some help leaves no name and no trail. The room was warm and smelled like coffee and wet gear. Maps on the walls held red grease pencil lines that looked too clean for what they meant. SEAL Team 7 Bravo platoon sat in a tired hush while boots dried under vents. Fluorescent light hummed like a soft engine. Lieutenant Cole Harrison read a mission report that said the team survived an ambush at Grid Sierra 5 with help from an unidentified Overwatch element. The sentences were neat and bloodless and did not carry the weight of the valley. He signed where the line waited and set the folder down with care. Senior Chief Mason Brewer met his eyes, and the look said enough as rank and roles stayed in place. Far away, the Arctic frontier kept its own quiet. Lieutenant Ava Whitaker sat at a metal desk in a nameless facility and wrote a short, precise after-action report that listed distances, wind speed, and target count. She checked times and converted them for clarity. 7:20 a.m. for the exfil call and 5:30 a.m. for the step-off. Her paragraphs were clean and complete and left nothing extra on the page. A young recruit paused in the doorway and asked why she did not tell people what she really did. Ava said, "Real protection does not need applause and only needs results." Then she turned back to the keyboard and kept typing while the window showed a slow drift of snow. The quiet of the room matched the quiet of the work, and the day moved forward with no need for names. The Arctic frontier lies quiet again. Wide sheets of snow smoothing every edge. Wind crosses the flats and wipes clean the last tracks from the mission. Reports sit in folders with neat lines that press a wild night into tidy boxes. Radios now carry calm check-ins. The kind you do not notice until you remember what they cost. Cole Harrison stands outside a hangar and listens to a voice that says all clear. It is only a few words. Steady and plain. And it sounds like home. He thinks of whiteout glare, of breath burning cold, and of a lane that opened when it mattered. The weight in his chest feels lighter in the morning air. Somewhere out there, a watchtower takes the wind and holds. The Guardians feel more like a creed than a unit on a roster. A promise kept by people who would rather not be seen. They carry skill and patience and put them down only when someone else is safe, like breath on cold glass. Their presence appears for a moment and fades. The snowfield returns to silence as the sky clears to a thin blue. A simple thought lingers that some heroes never stand in the light. They choose the cold so others can live with warmth and peace. The screen falls to black, and a final card offers quiet thanks to those who serve in silence.